Well, hey, Franco, good to be able to sit down virtually and chat with you again. Always lots to talk about. I want to start right off and get into it, though, with the Taxpayers Federation has launched kind of a new initiative and campaign for the season on something that's going to be kind of a unique occurrence this year with a plebiscite, or I guess it'd be a referendum this fall. You want to expand on that?
Yeah, so we have a referendum this fall in Alberta, October 18th. So everyone in Alberta, mark your calendars for that because we're having the equalization referendum. And Corey, I think it's pretty clear right now that we're getting a raw deal. And I also think it's pretty clear that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau isn't just going to hand us a fair deal on a silver platter, right? We're actually going to have to organize. We're actually going to have to mobilize, and really, we're going to have to fight for a fair deal. And the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we see the equalization referendum as Albertans' best bet to actually fight for fairness and to get a fair deal. And that's why we launched our Fight Equalization campaign. And the whole goal of it is to win that equalization referendum and to get a clear majority outcome opposing the equalization status quo. And, I've heard from so many Albertans, and I agree with this too. It's how I feel, is that, I'm sick and tired of Alberta being treated as the cash cow for the rest of Canada. So really this equalization referendum is our best bet to tell Trudeau just what we think of the status quo.
Well, that's it. And I mean, equalization, it's a grossly, well, like so many bureaucratic things, complex formula on how they decide exactly how much is going to go and how much isn't. And it is in itself constitutionally entrenched, but it can be reduced and essentially starved down to nothing through legislation without changing the Constitution, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, equalization, it was adopted in 1957, I believe, was the first payment. And then it was $139 million. Now it's like $20 billion. So the program has just swelled and swelled. And the thing is that it's a very political program. Like the aspects of it have changed many times over the decade, right? And so what we're saying at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, I mean, step one is just to reduce the size of the program, right? Like, why does it have to keep increasing every single year? And I think that would really be the best change for Alberta taxpayers because we're paying into this federal program. And of course, through that, we're directly subsidizing politicians that are seeming to get their kicks from roadblocking our development, right? We're directly subsidizing politicians who are calling our oil dirty energy. They're opposing our pipelines, and it's costing us billions of dollars.
Yeah, no, the double standard or just the gross inequity of it. I mean, to keep stepping on us, demonizing us, shutting us down, like making us incapable of generating money, yet still sucking out what little we're managing to generate. If ever there's an appetite, though, we know to get rid of equalization, it'll be if and when Alberta might finally actually qualify to receive it. We've been, floundering for 5 years now economically, yet somehow we're still a net zero recipient. I mean, how bad does it have to get before we would qualify for this welfare program? There seems to be a bit of a double standard going on here.
You know what? I'm really happy you brought that up because I'd love to address that claim. I've since we've launched our Fight Equalization campaign, I've actually had people ask me, well, what happens if we, get rid of equalization or drastically reduce it, and then we start being eligible for equalization? Well, I have a pretty clear response for that. And it's, Albertans, we don't want equalization dollars. We want the feds to take their boots off our necks, right? We want to get our neighbors back to work. We want to be able to build pipelines. That's the solution. Let us build some pipelines. Let us get our neighbors back to work, not more equalization dollars. For me, what I'm sick and tired of? I'm sick and tired of my friends moving to other provinces because they can't get a job in Alberta. I'm sick and tired of seeing in the newspaper, countless private sector workers losing their jobs. I'm sick and tired of reading about businesses holding on by a thread or shutting down their doors for good. And we're all struggling, I think, with COVID-19, right, since early 2020. But the fact of the matter is that Alberta has been struggling for the last 5+ years. And you brought this up, but it's not like the federal government has been making things easier for us during our tough times, right? It almost feels like they're kicking us while we're down.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to be a recipient of funds from a bad program. I just want the bad program gone. But I just pointing out, it seems that would be the only way to get a will on the part of the government to suddenly crank it back, because they really do seem to have a disdain for Alberta. They have, particularly when we have a liberal government in power. Maybe just to clarify a couple of things, though, because of course we do have a number of tall foreheads who always like going on and saying, well, equalization, you're not actually cutting a check to Ottawa. It's much more involved than that. But the truth of it is, okay, there's one pot of money and the government transfers it back to us under a number of different guises and programs and terribly inefficient things. So we never specifically put a check out for equalization. We just put it out to general revenue, and then they dole it out as equalization. But it's the same bloody thing. I mean, we're talking semantics here.
Yeah, we are absolutely, and you know that really frustrates me too. That argument, and they're right. The Alberta government isn't cutting a check for the Quebec government, for example. I mean, it all comes through federal income taxes. But here's the crux of the story. Here's the fundamental unfairness: is that Alberta taxpayers, right? We're paying into federal income taxes, for example, and then our taxpayer dollars are going directly to subsidize these politicians in other provinces who are intent on roadblocking our development. And here's another crucial unfairness. I mean, it's more than just the dollars and cents here, right? Because through equalization, there's actually a greater incentive, or I should say there's a disincentive for politicians to actually focus on growing their own economies, right? Equalization allows these politicians in other provinces who are receiving equalization dollars to rely more on Albertans' tax dollars and less on growing their own economies. And I think this is a key issue. And you know, we talk about a lot of the statements that have been coming from Quebec's premier about equalization, about our dirty energy. Those are his words, not mine. But you know what? Even Quebec's premier has recognized this perverse reality of equalization. Even Quebec's premier has said, well, we need to rely more on growing our own economy and less on equalization. Premier Higgs in New Brunswick has also said this, is that the equalization receiving provinces are actually being harmed by equalization in a sense because it allows politicians to get away with bad policies.
Well, and yes, and you create a culture of entitlement and dependency when you have welfare type programs. I know people get upset when you talk about that, or I'm not worried about people getting upset with me. Like, there's an analogy I spoke of recently because I was in the oil field for 20 years, and seasonal labor was very important to us. We brought in a lot of people, and loads of them would come from the Maritimes. Fantastic people, excellent hard workers. And there were two different types of them, though. There was a bunch who would come out and actually they put down roots in Alberta and they bought homes or rented homes. They raised their families here and they worked full time in the industry. Then there were the others who would come out just long enough to get unemployment insurance and collect that and sit back until the next season came. And because we had, to be honest, I'm not as familiar with it as I used to be. Well, the unemployment used to be, if you lived in the Maritimes, you didn't need a heck of a lot of weeks in working before you qualified versus out here where you needed to put in a whole pile of time to be able to qualify for unemployment insurance. And again, rather than moving people to where the money was, we were moving the money to the people, which just made for an inefficient system, which drained us. Plus, then we would start bringing in foreign labor rather than domestic because it just wasn't worth it to bring people from the Maritimes. And it harms them. It harmed the work ethic. It harmed Alberta. It just doesn't work at all. If you just leave it alone, we had the labor. We just had to, let them go.
And Corey, you remind me of a crucial point here. It's not luck that Albertans were able to grow our economy, right? It's not luck that Albertans, I'm talking, of course, before the real downturn that hit us in 2014, 2015, but it wasn't luck that we had high incomes, right? We are a very entrepreneurial province. We had policies in place that actually encourage resource development. Remember, government policy matters. It's not just that we have these resources. You look not even just across Canada, but all over the world, there's many places where they are resource rich, but it doesn't mean that they're going to have a good policy environment and high incomes, right? It's not by chance that Alberta became a very wealthy province. Of course, I'm talking pre-downturn because, over the last 5+ years, we have just been hammered left, right, and center. And our federal government has really been making things much harder. And let's just look at the facts here, right? We saw our federal government reject Northern Gateway. We saw the feds move the regulatory goalposts for Energy East, right? We saw our political system chase away Kinder Morgan as it was trying to spend billions of its own dollars building the Trans Mountain expansion. And then to add insult to injury, you still have Trudeau's Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, Bill C-48, the discriminatory tanker ban. He imposed a carbon tax on us, and he's getting ready to impose a second carbon tax. So while we have Alberta traditionally a province that is very entrepreneurial, that knows that government doesn't create prosperity, but let the private sector thrive, and at the same time we have the federal government with its boots on our neck.
Yeah, no, if resources alone determined the wealth of a state, then Venezuela would be one of the richest places on the planet. I mean, they've quite clearly demonstrated if you have all the raw resources, but if you have horrific domestic policy, you're broke. And so, I mean, Alberta had good policy. And as you said, we're getting walls built around us. I mean, they're invisible ones. The Keystone died. We can blame that on Biden. Fine. Trudeau didn't put up much fight for it, but to what little credit I could give the man, I don't think there would have been a lot he could have done about it. The problem, though, is that as Albertans, somebody invested a lot of our tax dollars on our behalf on that line, and now we're on the hook for that cancellation. The corporate welfare, which is a concept near and dear to your heart there. And
well, Corey, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, you and I have chatted a ton about corporate welfare, right? And we definitely do not want government to get into the business of business, to get into the losing business of picking winners and losers. Like the last thing that we need is politicians and bureaucrats running around trying to play investment banker with our money. But you know what I see as the fundamental issue around this whole Keystone XL saga? The real issue here is that we can't get pipelines built in Canada by businesses, right? We have been seeing roadblock after roadblock being put up that prevents job creators from actually building pipelines in Canada. Now, Keystone XL, it was an absolute punch to the gut, but it wouldn't have felt like such a blow if we were able to get Northern Gateway approved and get it going. If we were able to build Energy East, like I said, if we were able to actually allow a private sector business use its own money to build the Trans Mountain expansion, right? But of course, we've seen our federal government put up these roadblocks. And, to your point, Corey, I mean, we haven't really seen Trudeau and the Trudeau government really bat an eye over President Biden's decision. But I mean, how can Trudeau really put pressure on Washington? I mean, could you imagine that phone call? Trudeau calls Mr. Biden up and says, hey, why don't you let businesses build pipelines in the United States? I mean, Biden should just reply with, well, why don't you allow businesses build pipelines in Canada? Right? Trudeau's the guy with the No More Pipelines law. Let me just continue my rant for another minute here. What really grinds my gears is when I hear this social license argument.
God.
I think the only reasonable response to the social license argument is just to laugh at someone's face. And I'm not trying to be rude, but come on. Remember the NDP in Alberta? They said that, well, we needed a provincial carbon tax to get social license for pipelines. Well, what happened? You saw BC politicians pledge to employ every tool in the toolbox to block our pipelines, Trans Mountain expansion I'm talking about. You saw Quebec's premier call our energy or oil dirty energy, say there's no social acceptability for pipelines. So clearly the Alberta NDP wasn't able to buy social license for pipelines. And then the federal government, look what happened. Trudeau lied to us and he massively hiked a carbon tax. It's going up by now 467% by 2030. Trudeau is also going to be imposing a second carbon tax. When it's all said and done, that means a family will be soaked for $40 every time they go and fill up their minivan. So you know what? The scoreboard on social license is not adding up for Albertans because guess what? We're getting 2 carbon taxes, no Keystone XL. So you know what I say to people who talk about this social license, Corey? I say, well, you can't buy social license when it's not for sale.
No, it's a myth, and it was just something to sell us on bad policy, and we're all paying the price for it now. And one thing I despise is, I guess you could say, progressive pundits or politicians when they start talking about business principles, because obviously they don't understand them or they don't care, one of the two. But the problem, I mean, as we see with Alberta's resources right now, or Western Canada's resources, is like any business, you need a number of customers. If you've only got one customer, you're in a terribly precarious position. That customer is going to call the shots on you. It's called a buyer's market. And that's what we have with our energy when our prime customer anyways is the United States. I mean, even the Trans Mountain hits to the coast, but most of that oil ends up going down to Washington to a refinery down in there. We don't have a broad customer base. And that's why we sell at a discount, because of course they can just offer us lower prices and we have no choice. As you said, we need more pipes, and then the Keystone wouldn't have hit us as hard as it did. But these guys try to make this business case. And if you want to see the thing that, it doesn't take much with me to get the vein pulsing in my head when my blood pressure gets up. When you start hearing people say, well, oil, there's no demand for it. There's just not a business case for it anymore. What a bunch of BS. The world wants it, but we've made it domestically so impossible to get it to them that it's uneconomical at that point. But that's not free markets as they blasphemously call it. That is the opposite. That is government strangling the natural progression of business. There's my rant on that little bit right now. But oh boy, it's
Well,
maddening.
let me add my 2 cents into this. All right. Well, that drives me absolutely up the wall as well. When you have these professors, academics saying that there's no business case for something. Well, why don't you let the businessmen and businesswomen and business people decide whether or not there's a business case for something, right? They're the ones with skin in the game. They're the ones who are the experts here. And really, we're seeing governments make it almost as hard as possible for businesses to thrive, for us to get our neighbors back to work. Now, you talked about the issue with pipelines, right? Let's call it the differential, right? The lack of our ability to sell our prices for the world market. Well, we all know about how that impacts jobs, and we all know how that impacts the economy, but it also has a real taxpayer issue to that as well. And this is something the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has been talking for a long time. And it's that the oil and gas industry, it helps us actually pay for the bills of government services, right? We're losing out on billions of dollars in government revenue because we have governments putting up roadblocks that prohibit businesses from building these pipelines. So not only are we losing out on jobs, not only are we losing out on economic activity, we're also losing out on tax revenue to actually pay for this thing, for these stuff. And look, we got massive deficits now, massive debts now. So if we're not letting oil and gas industry help pay for this stuff, well, where do you think government's going to go get the money from?
Well, and we've got other things looming on that front. I'm finally starting to hear a little more on it. I watched an agonizing couple of clips from Question Period where Trudeau was asked repeatedly on line 5, which is a looming disaster that's, kind of in the background on the news. We're hearing a little more, but that's an Enbridge line. It's been there for 70 years. It runs from Western Canada. Well, it goes to line 3, feeds line 5, which is another issue now that is at risk. Line 3 runs down Superior, Wisconsin. It comes together, goes through line 5, comes up into Sarnia, Ontario. The Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer, has said, we're shutting that thing down in May. We're pulling the permit. It's done. That will immediately put 5,000 to 6,000 people out of work in Sarnia. Union people, that's why I was thinking, surprised we're not hearing more about it, at least on that front. And it's Ontario. Maybe this is the wake-up call they kind of need, but we're all going to pay. I'd rather this just was halted somehow than have to teach a hard lesson to people out there. Again, maybe, especially with the fact that Trudeau let Keystone go without a fight, and now he's staying silent while this one is looming. Whitmer and Biden are close allies as far as the climate agenda goes. I think that thing's dead.
That I really hope not. But let me bring this back to kind of this whole equalization referendum, and another reason why we think it's so important, because it touches on what you're talking about. Look, the equalization referendum, it's important because we do need to fix equalization, right? We do have to. This is an unfair program that needs to be dealt with. So we need to get the provinces, we need to get the federal governments to the table to fix these issues, right? But the equalization referendum is more than just about equalization. I really do think that it's our best way to get our legitimate grievances on the national agenda, right? To actually shine a light on Albertans' issues. Because as I talk to so many people living in our prairie province, one of the issues is we just feel like we're either not being listened to or being ignored by the rest of Canada, and in particularly the Trudeau government, right? Well, I don't think there's really a better way to get our legitimate grievances onto the kitchen tables in Victoria, Toronto, Quebec, and St. John's, other than having this equalization referendum. I really do feel like this is a great way for us to show the rest of Canada, look, we're hurting and we need the system to be changed because the status quo that we have right now really isn't working.
Yeah, well, and some of the people opposed to it, again, are saying it's going to be costly. Oh, come on. It's coupled with a municipal election anyways. We're going to poll. It won't be that costly. And others are saying, well, there's nothing you can do. It's non-binding. Justin Trudeau can crumple it up and throw it in the corner. Yeah, you can. But what a valuable thing to have a 2-month full open discussion on this whole issue among ourselves. And you're right, it will make news around the rest of the country. And if a very large proportion, if 70% of Albertans say, we want out of this equalization mess. This program isn't working for us. It will be terribly politically dangerous for the federal government to crumple that up and throw it away. Then you're going to see some lobbying for a different referendum altogether. And that one, under the Clarity Act, will be binding. So maybe this dress rehearsal will open some ears up to realize that we need to adjust some things in our system if we don't want things to get heck of a lot worse in the unity front.
Well, Corey, I'm the taxpayer guy, man. So it really just brings a smile to my face to hear all these people worried about taxpayer dollars. I love it. That's great. We should be talking about taxpayers' money and looking for ways to make sure we're not wasting it. So I love it. Thank God we're talking about that. But you know what's really a waste of Alberta taxpayers' money? Equalization, right? We're directly subsidizing these politicians that are roadblocking our development. Ted Morton, former finance minister, former energy minister here in Alberta, he said back in 2018, equalization alone is costing us $3 billion that year. That's an annual cost, right? That's more than $600 per Albertan in 1 year. So to me, that seems like the waste of money. As you said, it's also being coupled with the municipal election. That's a good way to save cost. But look, the worst thing that you could do for national unity is to ignore the problem that is going on right now, right? If you ignore this, all that is going to do is to add fuel to the fire. I mean, let me just give you an analogy of something that I'm used to, right? I've grown up playing hockey, grown up playing baseball. I mean, when you're on a team and you have issues, you got to work those issues out, right? You got to sit down with your teammates and you have to figure something out. You have to figure out a way to overcome these issues. I mean, that's what we need to do here in Canada. So from a national unity perspective, I mean, the best thing that you could do is to get everyone into the room, get to the negotiating table, and figure this out.
Well, yeah, and I mean, again, as you said, it's discussion, it's discourse. I mean, again, the academic class who says, this is something we shouldn't even bother with. We don't understand it. It's too deep for the average Albertan to understand. Well, what better educational process for us rubes then to spend a month or two talking about nothing but that? There's your chance to school us, guys. There's where you can tell us how we're under this misconception that it's a bad program or that we should do anything about it. I can't see anywhere we can lose in holding this referendum, aside from maybe people actually vote and overwhelmingly want equalization to stay where it is. But I suspect that's not going to be the case.
Well, Corey, let me just touch on that, then. Let me just touch on the importance of the referendum and the importance of Albertans actually being mobilized. So we do need a clear majority victory in the equalization referendum for change, right? We need to have as many Albertans as possible come out, vote that we do need change in equalization, because that is really what's going to send the message to the rest of Canada. That's really going to be that's what's going to send the message to Trudeau. So if you want change, you have to come out. You have to organize. You have to mobilize. And that's why we launched the Fight Equalization website, fightequalization.ca. So please go check that out. There's a way where you can get involved. We definitely need volunteers. We need all hands on deck, because this campaign is really meant to be by Albertans for Albertans. So if you're pissed off with the status quo, please check out fightequalization.ca. And really, I would say, do not stay home when it comes to October 18th, the day of the vote, because if you stay home, you're letting Trudeau know that he's doing a good job.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that, because this isn't like a normal election campaign. There's not going to be political parties out there doing this on your behalf or campaigning. We need to do this as citizens. You got to get up, got to help you guys, the group you put together, the website, encourage our neighbors. I mean, treat it like a campaign, but there's not a party in this case. So we've got to do it ourselves. And it's so important. As you said, if it's a low turnout, or if if it's 51% against, it's not going to send the message we need to send to Ottawa. We need a good, solid, Albertans saying that we've had enough of this. So I really appreciate the work you guys are doing and keeping this up there as a campaign front and center. Anything else you wanted to close up with, or how people can find more info on what you're up to?
Well, thanks, Corey, for having me on, and I love this discussion. Thanks for getting the message out. But yeah, so please, everyone, go to fightequalization.ca. You can join for free. We also ask for you to help us volunteer, get in touch with me. We'll be able to figure out different ways to really mobilize, to get out the vote. And of course, we're going to be spreading the message nonstop. And just mark in your calendars, October 18th, that is when the equalization referendum is scheduled for. So please check out our website, fightequalization.ca.
Right on. Well, thanks, Marco. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Yeah, no problem, Corey.